Man, I was such a big Nassourdine Imavov fan after his last couple of fights. We talk about the Jordan Williams fight, for example. I broke that one down, and we were so young in this, but to an absolute T. We talk about the way Jordan Williams fights, right? Loves to push forward, heavy chin, keeps his eye on the prize, and just constantly pushes forward. The thing about Imavov is he's that technical French-style kickboxer, right? So if you're just going to go forward and backwards with him, he can handle that. Thing about Imavov, he's kind of a slow starter, gauges a lot in the beginning, and so it gives his opponent opportunities to really exploit him. You talk about the Phil Hawes fight, you talk about the Jordan Williams fight. That was where both fighters had so much success in the beginnings against Imavov, but then all of a sudden it becomes a lot tougher later in the fight because he has pretty good durability and cardio. And the most important thing was, even against Phil Hawes, I thought that he did such a good job with landing, but Phil was just able to do more work in terms of control, get the fight into the areas that make it look like you're doing more damage, because the better striker in that fight as well was 100% Imavov. So already being, 1-1 in the UFC, but having such a good, piece of evidence as a striker at this level is really important, because I think a majority decision against a guy like Phil Hawes, who just dismantled what I believe was a pretty good prospect in Kyle Dawkins, is a huge feat for your second UFC fight. And so, well, let's be clear that Imavov is not taking any charity fights when it comes to his UFC career, going from Jordan Williams to Phil Hawes and now Ian Heinisch. Ian Heinisch, we know him well, the big LFA standout, got his dues on Dana White Contender Series, and it's kind of hit or miss in the UFC ranks. Now, what's really cool about him is there seems to be a specific style of fighter that can, have their way with him. And it's some of these, very good wrestlers that come with okay striking in the beginning of the fights. You talk about Omari Akhmedov, Derek Brunson, and Kelvin Gastelum. So for me, Kelvin Gastelum had a great game plan there to utilize the takedowns to really make Ian work for his shots. That's where Kelvin Gastelum needs to be putting his game plan, into works all the time, because it makes him look so dominant. Then you look at the Derek Brunson fight. Ian Heinisch did so well in the beginning of that fight, but then that third round was just so dominant that it gave Derek Brunson the win 2 rounds out of 3. And then you talk about, last but certainly not least, again, another great wrestler in Omari Akhmedov, where he's always threatening for submissions. He's always trying to keep the fight on the ground. And so when those are the fights that Ian's fighting, he seems to have a bit of an issue with that. Lucky for him, some of these French kickboxers might be great in the clinch, but takedowns and things like that are not their cup of tea. 60% striking accuracy versus Ian Heinisch's 50 is something that Imavov very much will credit himself for. So for me, it's a lot of that technical style kickboxer versus a kind of brawler that wants to work it into the ground and get that ground and pound going. Kind of like your old school MMA fighter, right? Kind of good everywhere, and then really is looking to be able to just really do damage on top via ground and pound and just wear on a guy. I think that's what you really look to do when you're that style of fighter. And I think he's able to go 3 rounds pretty easily, can probably even get a slight edge in cardio for this one, because the way you look at Imavov is, for how crisp and how good that defensive striking is, it's really a testament to just how much damage he does kind of take and keep pushing, right? The Jordan Williams fight, he did kind of slow down in that 3rd round because of how much pressure Jordan tends to bring. And with Phil Hawes, it was very much a similar take, because he started to fight in very uncomfortable places. So paths to victory are pretty simple for Ian Heinisch, right? Make him uncomfortable. Don't fight this fight at kickboxing distance for 3 rounds. There's no reason to do that. Get the fight to the ground as quickly as possible, but also maybe work in some of that boxing up against the fence that can help you wear on him, get him tired, because you want him sloppy. You don't want him getting to those areas where all of a sudden he's free flowing and landing over 60% of his strikes, because his differential is much better than Ian Heinisch's. And so that's the one area where I think Ian needs to almost be humble and just tell himself, like, if that striking range is just not going well from the beginning, start to work some bigger bombs and level change and all those fun stuff. Because when you look at the paths of victory for Imavov, again, fairly simple, right? I think that he has shown very good defensive awareness when it comes to takedowns and trying to work his way back to his feet and all that kind of stuff. But those are all defensive positions. So if you have a guy like Imavov mostly working in those areas, even if you can't keep him on the ground and fill him in the face with your ground and pound, you at least have him on that back foot, that defensive foot, where he's constantly trying to find new ways to create some of his own offense. And for him, he's going to want to stay in that boxing, kickboxing range. I think that he's 100% going into this as an MMA factory guy. Alan Bordeaux didn't have the best showing, for the gym, but that's where you got to keep the path to victory for Imavov very honest, right? Kickboxing range, utilize that at all costs. Even if you have to outpoint him for 3 rounds, it's just without the clinch work, without the, level changing, he's very much going to keep it in areas where he's completely comfortable, because we've seen him at least be in uncomfortable spaces where he has to constantly be defensive. And that's the cool thing about Imavov's game, is he seems very good defensively in all the areas to get himself back to his feet or work up against the cage. But that's just the thing. For Ian Heinisch, that's a great place to be, because from a points perspective and from an MMA fight perspective, you're winning. And so if you can keep a guy like that on his back foot, on his defensive foot, where he can't really do much of his damage and stay in his comfort zone of being in that kickboxing range, you're winning the fight. Whereas, very clean cut path to victory for Imavov, it's just stay in that range. Anytime you see him trying to level change, look for those kicks, look for those knees. We just talked about that Randy Costa style, but a lot of these fighters are moving side to side or even lower. There just seems to be these openings for kicks, but just not a lot of people are throwing them anymore, whether it's in fear of takedowns or just not having that, pedigree under you to be throwing it at this level. All the reason, under the sun to not be able to do something like that is fair, but it's just when those openings exist, it's just really easy to see how that fight can either be ended or, switch the tide, if you will. So I think that that's where Imavov is going to struggle, when your path to victory is so finite, when a guy like Ian Heinisch is able to kind of maybe even deal with the punches and push forward, because we haven't seen much knockout power from Imavov either. It's just really, simple to go with Ian Heinisch as the boring favorite, as much as you want to see a really fun stand-up fight. I think it's safe to say that Ian should deserve a line between -150, -200, because Imavov just hasn't been the best fighter that in those first 2 fights. And I mean, a 1-1 record with some good showing against Phil Hawes tends to be somewhere closer to that +150, +120 range. And so that's where I think it's going to be. Let's take a look. Ian Heinisch definitely deserves to be a favorite. And yeah, so -155 for Ian Heinisch, so definitely at the very top end of that little range I provided. So -150 for Ian, and Nassourdine is coming in about +130, which is pretty much exactly where we thought he'd be. I think that's a fair line given the history of both fighters. We just said Ian Heinisch has been, kind of your battle-tested regional guy who made his name for himself on Dana White's Contender Series and just is starting to find his mark against some of the best middleweights on the planet. So get ready for that one. It's going to be so fun. I think that it's going to be one of those ones where it's a technical brawler's fantasy. And so if you just want to see a bunch of guys throw down in the most eloquent and technical way, that's probably a great one to check out. So can't wait for that.